welcome back to the African Comic Guy. And today is another day we get to talk about a character, actually a pretty important character in the DC universe. One of my favorite characters, who plays a major role actually in the Justice League, and that's none other than Black Lightning. And we're about to talk about him. But before we do, let's cue the intro. Now, Black Lightning is actually a pretty huge character in the DC universe, and he first got his first big break in 1977 as one of the very first black superheroes in all of comics. You know, you've definitely had a lot of superheroes who happen to be black in the world of comics. You know, really big ones. You know, you obviously know. From Wakanda, you know, Black Panther, right? You know, John Stewart, Green Lantern, right? There's so many different characters, you know, Storm from X-Men, you know? So there's been a lot, really a lot of characters who happen to be black in comics. But one of the very, very first ones was actually Black Lightning. And again, in the 1970s, you know, comics are really blossoming. And, you know, prior to that, you know, if you went back to the 30s and 40s, unfortunately, you know, those were times when you didn't really have black representation in comics. And obviously you could understand why, because of the times, right? But coming from that, you now, you know, in the 70s, late 60s to the 70s, you had writers and publishers who realized, you know, number one, there's an opportunity here to tell these stories, not only to really focus on a different kind of character, but at the same time, how about introduce culture and tradition, especially when it comes into the black community. And it started primarily with these writers decided, you know what, I'm going to take a risk, not knowing, mind you, you remember comics have, you know, comic fans are, you know, comic fans, right? And if they don't like something, they let you know real fast, right? So you're taking a gamble on trying to do something different. But again, that's the beauty of comics. Comics allow you to imagine, to think of a world, a different world. You know what I mean? Immerse yourself in something different. So they took a risk and it worked. And Black Lightning came out and it was a huge success. And it became a huge success over the decades. And because of that, you have other characters coming after him. You know, Black Panther came after him. You know what I mean? So these were writers figuring, you know, okay, these are different studios, but realizing there are opportunities to tell different stories from a black perspective, you know? And with Black Panther specifically, actually even being African. You know what I mean? So they took a risk and it took off. And because of that, Black Lightning has become a household name. And we're about to talk about how he's become a household name and how he's actually also been able to affect the DC universe. We're about to talk about that. Now, for those of you who don't know who Black Lightning is, you know, he's a character called Jefferson Pierce, and he has had different stories, different iterations to his origin story. And in most of his origin stories, what you realize, number one, is he's actually a teacher who ends up being a principal in Metropolis, actually. And one of the cool things about him is he has this mission statement all about him. You know, I think he's one of those cool superhero characters that when people say they want to do more outside of their superhero character, that's him. You know, being a teacher and a principal, one of the things he wants to do not only is to encourage these kids through education. He tells them to focus on education because he happens to be in a school that is not in a really good neighborhood. And unfortunately, a lot of the kids that he teaches or mentors come from these really bad neighborhoods. So he takes on this role because what he wants to do is to show these kids there is a better way out here. You don't really have to fall into this fall into this pit, fall in with these crowds that take you down to those roads where you know exactly where you're going. It's either death or jail, ruining families, having no future outside of crime. So he's taken on this role and he loves that role. It's one of those that he's passionate about, but at the same time he's a superhero. And again, he's one of those superheroes that uses electricity. And it's actually one of the cool things about him is how he got his electricity. In some origin stories, he actually developed this belt. It's an electric belt. And he would use it whenever he would fight crime. And then eventually, it's like the electricity basically infused with him and became one. In more popular, more common origin stories, he was born with a metagene. Okay, and a metagene is in the comic world. A lot of people are born with this. It's not really a genetic; it's a genetic condition, and accurately called a metagene. And once activated, it activates a power that's dormant in you. You don't know you have it in you until it's actually activated. Now, for some get activated and become like the Inhumans, right? You get powers like where you can have spikes. There's actually a character called Spike, where you shoot out spikes. Some people can turn invisible. Some people can shoot out rays. Some people can levitate or fly. But with him specifically, the power that manifested in him from his metagene was the ability to manipulate, control, and shoot out electricity. And he does that in several different ways, and he, over the years, obviously growing up, he's been able to develop this power. And because of that, he does some really, really cool things with it, with his power. Now, some of the cool things about his power, actually, so there are some of the cool things he can actually do. He can absorb electricity, as much electricity, kind of like a battery, but unlike a battery, he doesn't really explode, because obviously batteries have limits, right? They have a capacity of how much power they can actually absorb or contain, and push them past that, they explode. But he can actually absorb as much electricity as he can, and at the same time, he can also shoot it out as much electricity as he can. He can also create these force fields, electric force fields around him, meaning he can actually shield people. And because of his electric power, he can also fly. And so there's so many things that he can actually do with his power. And he can actually even create an electromagnetic field, meaning he can shut out anything in close proximity to him. He also, at the same time, it's kind of like the electricity allows him to have like a bulletproof lining, meaning he practically is bulletproof. Nothing can really get through this electric field that he's actually created. It's a really, really cool power that he has and uses. But again, he's one of those characters that really likes using it. Like, it's last minute. It's one of those things where he says, before I go there, before I take it there, I've tried everything that I could. I've thought of every other avenue to really tackle this particular problem. But at the same time, as a superhero, he has sworn himself to his city to protect civilians, and he does it, and he does it extremely well. And because of that, he comes on the radar of the Justice League, ends up becoming a Justice League member, and becomes one of those critical, really iconic members of the Justice League, because he's a little bit older, so he's more mature. He brings more to the table other than just his superhero powers, right? This is a man that has life, and this is a man who's grown up. He's grown up. He has a family, right? He's raised a family as not only a superhero, but also as a principal. He has two daughters, and those two daughters actually inherit his electric powers. Both, Thunder and Lightning, they both attend his high school that he's a principal and a teacher of. And they actually end up being superheroes themselves and actually end up being on a team with Batman. Now, Thunder and Lightning end up being part of a team called the Outsiders that's actually led by Batman. And if you don't know anything about the Outsiders, it's a really, really young team. I mean, picture Young Justice, right? But they were led by Batman, and it's actually pretty interesting. It's funny. The Outsiders is one of those really nice nice stories, nice comic stories that hasn't really been explored, not only in animation comics but at the same time in movies. Hopefully we get The Outsiders at some point, because we've seen Young Justice on HBO Max. And if you haven't watched Young Justice, actually I would highly suggest watching Young Justice on HBO Max, because it's rated R and it's fun. There's also Young Justice animation that could be for kids, and it's also fun to watch. You can actually see Black Lightning in those series as well. But outside of that, yeah, Black Lightning becomes a member of the Justice League, ends up becoming one of the crucial members of the Justice League. Not the, you always have the original seven, but he comes after that and becomes one of those really crucial members, especially when the Justice League ends up having a lot of issues, really not only connecting with people and with themselves, because the Justice League itself expands so wide when it starts including other superheroes, right? They become this massive team all over the world, and it becomes a problem really keeping the main thing, right? Not breaking rules, not bending rules. And if you know anything about Black Lightning, he is all about rules. People always say the end justifies the means, and to him, no. No, 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 no. You always do the right thing no matter what, no matter how hard it is, no matter how painful, no matter how much you feel that doing the opposite of what you're supposed to do will help. It doesn't really help. It creates more problems. And at the end, he actually ends up at some point, becoming the leader of the Justice League, because he is almost becomes like the sole reason, right? Because he ends up realizing, wait a minute, I can't do this no more, because you guys have become so big. You're so extended, right? It's like you've forgotten what brought everybody here together, right? Because you guys are bending and breaking rules. You're fighting enemies like enemies, right? You can't, Batman always says you can't fight crime by being a criminal, right? He has this code where he won't break that code. He won't go past that code. Same thing with Black Lightning. He realizes the Justice League needs course correction, and they actually end up choosing him. And if you watch Young Justice, you'll actually see the last episode, where he actually becomes the leader of the Justice League. And one of the things he says he's going to implement is the fact that from now on, moving forward, everything is above board. Honesty is basically our best policy here, and we're no longer going to break rules. We're no longer going to do what we're not supposed to do. We're going to follow the rules. We're going to do everything we're supposed to do to uphold the values that we've set, that the world sees through us. So, which is kind of cool. So he's actually a pretty good character, one of my favorite characters. Now, lastly, actually, in case you're not familiar with Black Lightning, he actually had a show on the CW, and actually became a pretty big show for CW. And Black Lightning, 4 seasons. I really feel like we actually honestly could have had more seasons, but I feel like coming off of the Arrowverse, where you had the Flash for 9 seasons, you had Arrow for 8 seasons, I think you had Supergirl for 6 seasons, and Black Lightning came after these shows were initially 4 or 5 seasons in. And those initial 4 or 5 seasons were the best seasons of each individual show. Like if you watch The Flash, your first 5 seasons, outstanding. Best writing you could actually see out there. If you watch Arrow, you can actually go online, and Arrow, the first 3 seasons, Arrow was on par with some of the biggest shows on TV, because that's how much it drew audiences. Because the writing, again, I've talked about it, good writing, good casting, and good directing, you can't beat that. And they hit the home run with all these shows. Now Supergirl, I can't, because they changed the story so much, even though I like the character Supergirl. But we live in a day and age where everything has to be woke. There's nothing wrong about being woke, but I feel like you can You can add certain nuances to certain characters, but not take away from what we know from the comics. You know what I mean? Because again, I told you, as fans will let you know quick, fast, and in a hurry whether this is what, because we know, read comics, so we know what we expect. And when you change certain things just because you want to have a certain narrative, we're gonna have people are gonna let you know. Nobody ever liked. I didn't like it because it was just weird. But anyway, so Black Lightning came after these shows were somewhat established. But unfortunately, by the time it got rolling, these shows were coming to their end, where audiences were just getting bored with the monotonous, boring stuff. The writing just got boring and just sad, right? So unfortunately, it got caught in this landslide. And when it ended, we knew that after, if you watch the last episode of the fourth season, there's so much left. And my hope is they actually bring it back. Whether I would hope they bring it back on like Netflix. Netflix. It would be cool if Netflix or Max actually took it on. I think it would actually work because that show I feel is actually is better for an adult audience. It's not necessarily for kids. Now the original show on CW, kids can watch it, but you can tell the violence. You can tell that they're trying to really shelter. They're trying to really not go beyond a certain point, not trying to push the boundaries. But I feel like if this show was on HBO Max, it would actually click. It would do well. I think it would allow so much freedom for these writers to really explore a lot. So, but yeah, it was pretty successful. The writer who actually played Black Lightning is actually a very popular character, especially in the 90s, if you like 90s movies and 90s sitcoms. Is none other than Cress Williams. If you're not familiar with him, you probably don't know him from the 90s. I know him from the 90s because he used to be in a very popular show called Living Single. Pretty sure. He was actually pretty big on Living Single. He was there for a few seasons. And also Friday Night Lights. And Friday Night Lights is fairly new, right? Past 10, 15 years. But he's a lead and he played extremely well. But they also had an incredible cast. You can see them here. This cast was outstanding, from really young actors to some really accomplished actors, as you see here, some of whom I know you're very familiar with, either from movies or different shows. So this cast is actually pretty good, and I would highly recommend this show. If you haven't seen it, go to Netflix. It's actually on Netflix. I'm not sure if it's on HBO Max. You can find it on Netflix. Watch this show. I pretty sure you're gonna like it. I can't wait for you guys to actually let me know in the comments, how you feel about this show. I love talking about fun comics, but I also love talking about really like certain significant comics, and this is one of them. Coming from where comics have actually come from, right, and having to be the original comic that happens to feature a really black superhero. It says a lot. There's so much significance in that, right? Because a lot of times you actually want to see yourself portrayed, right? You want to see yourself not only celebrated, but at the same time, you want to see yourself, highlighted, right? You want to see your community. You want to see certain things about your stories featured. Like it's cool to see a lot of these characters that you see all along the last 90 years, in comics. But sometimes it's also cool to connect and be relatable. And so for me, this was highly relatable because it came from, a lot of times people can relate to this show or this character because a lot of people don't really grow up in nice areas, right? Some people have to grow up, unfortunately, because of circumstances or whatever. You grow up in areas where you don't really have access to anything good because of where you live. The schools are not so good. Crime is, it's just you're riddled with crime, right? You have a lot of the young people, unfortunately, end up leading horrible lives, right? Regardless of how much police intervention so there's a lot of relatability not only to the character, but also what this character has to overcome and go through. And, so this is why this character is very significant and why this comic became very popular, because people could actually relate to a lot of the stories. And I think these writers were very conscious of that, and they wanted to really tell that story from this standpoint, right? Because again, you have to be able to connect, but also tell real stories that people can see and say, dude, I know this. I know this. And if he can do this and come out of this and be this, well, I'm pretty sure I can. And that's another cool thing about comics. Comics allow you to use your imagination and hope and dream, right? But anyway, this is one of those characters to me that hits home because I enjoyed watching, reading this comic, and I can't wait to see it in the big screen. Actually, I don't know if we're gonna get it in the big screen in the DCU. I hope we do. I hope James Gunn can actually focus on this character, even if it's just tell it through Justice League. Can't wait to see that. But anyway, with that, again, we've come to the conclusion of this incredible video. Thank you guys for coming along this journey. As always, this is the African Comic Guy. Can't wait to see you guys on the next one. Signing out. Peace.